Well, hi everyone. Welcome to our webinar on bomb trains and the fracked gas infrastructure threat in Florida. My name is Brooke Arrett, and I'm your Florida Senior Organizer with Food and Water Watch. I'm joined here today by a wonderful panel of guests to discuss the fracked gas infrastructure build-out that has been happening in Florida. With us today are leading toxics and liquefied natural gas expert Fred Millar, our long-term ally and fierce anti-fossil fuel organizer, advocate, and scientist, and founder of Earth Ethics, Mary Gutierrez, and our Food and Water Team Tampa campaign lead, Sarah Edwards. They will join us for a panel discussion and will take questions from you, the audience, after we discuss the background of the fossil fuel industry's build out of fracked gas infrastructure here in Florida to produce, ship, and export what is known as liquefied natural gas, or LNG for short. So here's the agenda for the call. We will start by answering the question, what is LNG? And then we will talk about how it impacts Florida. And finally, as we said, we'll have our question and answers with our panelists. A few housekeeping matters first. As attendees, you have access to use the chat feature by speaking directly to us, the hosts and panelists, or chatting publicly with everyone. You can find this feature by clicking on the chat word bubble icon at the bottom center of your Zoom screen, and then you can toggle between who you want to be reaching. You also have the ability to submit questions to the panel using the Q&A feature, which is also at the bottom of the Zoom screen indicated by a Q&A. So feel free to interact throughout the webinar and we'll interact back with you. At Food and Water Watch, we mobilize people to win a fair and livable future. And that is what we are discussing today, the current LNG threat in Florida and how we can mobilize to fight it and ultimately win. For years, Food and Water Watch worked to ban fracking in Florida by building a statewide network of allies and volunteers that passed over 90 local measures banning or opposing fracking, and getting a commitment from Governor Ron DeSantis to stop fracking while he was running for office. He passed an executive order his third day in office against fracking. Despite this widespread support for stopping fracking in the Sunshine State, the oil and gas industry has been undeterred, and they continue to work to cement Florida into a fossil fuel future. So a little bit about fracking, if you're not very familiar with it, it's a dangerous, unconventional way of drilling for oil that's been shown to cause water pollution, premature births, earthquakes, and air pollution, amongst many others. Even though fracking isn't widespread in Florida, it has proliferated around the country, and these companies are using the potential for export as a way to incentivize and lock in more fracking and pipelines. Even as we see more communities committing to clean energy, unless we stop the liquefying and export of fracked gas, we will continue to see more and more fracking. In fact, during the 2020 legislative session, fossil fuel industry lobbyists got state Republican leadership to stop local governments from acting on climate change. And the industry continues to push for more fracked gas infrastructure, including fracked gas plants and liquefied natural gas exports, despite all of the science that shows we need to move away from fossil fuels as quickly as possible. So LNG is fracked gas that has been cooled into a liquid form. The industry hauls it over long distances on trucks, trains, and ships. In the last 5 years, Florida has been at the center of LNG infrastructure build out, with facilities already built in Jacksonville and Miami, and proposals for more in Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, and the Panhandle. These LNG projects are moving forward without any public oversight and relying on federal loopholes to secure fewer and fewer permits. The state of Florida has no laws regulating LNG, and the state legislature and Governor DeSantis have been more than friendly to the fossil fuel industry. Vessels have shipped US LNG overseas, and tanker trucks have shipped LNG domestically for decades. However, domestic shipment of LNG by rail is new. In 2015, the federal government issued its first ever permit for LNG shipments by rail in Alaska between Anchorage and Fairbanks. And then a second such approval was issued in 2017 for LNG shipments in Florida between Jacksonville and Miami. And on December 5th of 2019, the federal government issued its first special permit authorizing LNG transport in rail tank cars between Pennsylvania and New Jersey. LNG opened up in Florida under, or LNG transport opened up in Florida under a rule allowing LNG transport by rail without special permit. Because on April 10th, 2019, the Trump administration issued Executive Order 13868, directing the Secretary of Transportation to permit LNG shipment in rail tank cars throughout the US rail network. And this order loosened the rules on transporting LNG by rail, and it's a decision that's put millions in harm's way. Liquefied natural gas is volatile, and a minor train accident could ignite it in a massive explosion. Luckily, the perceived public safety and security risks of LNG by rail have raised concerns among state officials, the National Transportation Safety Board, and other members of Congress. In August of 2020, a group of environmental plaintiffs, represented by Earth Justice, filed a petition for review of the rule in the DC Circuit Court. Similarly, there have been attorney generals in 12 states from California, New York, Maryland, Delaware, Illinois, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, Washington, and the District of Columbia, also jointly filed a petition for review of the rule in the DC Circuit. And you'll notice that Florida is very blatantly missing from that list. So Florida has not opposed this rule. And Florida as a state doesn't have any state-specific guidelines regarding the liquefying of fracked gas or its transport by rail. The state just defers to the federal laws. And there's very little federal oversight of these projects. Fracked gas bomb trucks and trains are highly explosive, and they create a potential for disaster, along with the air pollution that they create along the way. Florida is one of only 2 states allowing large amounts of liquefied natural gas to be transported on these bomb trains. So Floridians are being used in a dangerous LNG experiment. So if you look at this map, you will see brown dots where there are LNG facilities. These are currently the 2 facilities in Florida, one in Jacksonville and one in Miami. And there is another proposed in the Panhandle at Port St. Joe. This facility is not seen on the map though, and is further evidence of the lack of oversight of these projects. The Jacksonville facility ships its LNG down the Florida East Coast Railway to Miami. And in Miami, once fracked gas is liquefied at the facility there, it's loaded onto trains or trucks and transported to Port Everglades in Fort Lauderdale for export. And these trains pass through heavily populated neighborhoods, which really increases the severity of potential disaster. Florida is the state most at risk of climate change's immediate impacts, with cities like Tampa and Miami expecting multiple inches of sea level rise in even the most conservative modeling scenarios. So we simply cannot afford to invest any further in fossil fuels in future, or fossil fuels in Florida. This LNG infrastructure will not only lead us to climate catastrophe, it poses immediate dangers to the Floridians living near the facilities and along the transport routes. Luckily, as you can see on the map, we've successfully stopped one of these projects from coming to Florida. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk about how.
Thanks, Brooke. Can you guys hear me? Earlier this year, Food and Water Watch uncovered information about a proposed LNG project right here in Tampa. A company called Strom Inc. Had already received approval to export LNG from the Department of Energy, and it was attempting to get approval to transport it from a new proposed facility in Crystal River to the Port of Tampa. This would mean transporting dangerous liquefied natural fracked gas over 80 miles from the facility to the export terminal by either truck or train. Once we learned about this dangerous proposal, Food and Water Watch organized several actions to bring public awareness to this issue. A group of us provided public comments at the Port of Tampa's board meeting over the summer, and we really tried to advocate against these dangerous liquefaction facilities and the practice of transporting LNG. Now that you know a little bit about LNG and the threat here in Florida, let's go to our experts. So I'd like to first welcome toxics expert Fred Millar, an anti-fossil fuel advocate, organizer, and scientist, and founder of Earth Ethics, Mary Gutierrez. Fred is joining us from Virginia.
Sarah, before we do, tell us a little bit more about what was going. You were telling us about what you did at the port's board meeting and how that stopped the project. Could you tell us a little bit about more why going to the Port of Tampa's board meeting over the summer got their attention?
For sure. So
and you're on video, by the way.
Okay. So we basically, the Port of Tampa, our understanding is that they've actually never had you, the Port of Tampa's never had any members of the public come and talk to their board meeting. So they were, I think, a little taken aback and impressed that we had sleuthed out this kind of stuff that was going on that they weren't really, being clear about. And so I think that really did surprise them. And we were able to ask some questions and really sit and talk to them about, what we were concerned about, or listen to rather, talk to them about what we were concerned about and listen to where they, kind of where they were talking about the project and try and learn a little bit more.
Yeah, so Sarah, I mean, it looks like they got their attention because they've never had anyone come and give public comments at their meetings before. And it also was able to give us a lot of helpful insights into their discussions and allowed us to ask questions about the status of the project, which was really exciting because of the work we did with the Tampa Bay Times to investigate the company's plans. And that during that investigation found out that Strom didn't actually have permission to build their liquefaction plant at the proposed location, which meant the project was not able to go ahead. In fact, we'll share a link to that article in the chat. And then what happened, and you were a big part of this, was that Food and Water Watch continued to urge the Department of Energy to revoke Strom's LNG exportation permits. And now it looks pretty clear that this project will not move forward. Could you tell us a little bit about this slide that I have up right now as far as the proposed?
Yeah, so I think, this was something we were able to talk really clearly at the meeting about, which was, our concern about this traveling through our communities here in Tampa. So basically we were going to see that, and this isn't the exact route, but kind of based on where the facility is and where the port is, this would be the most logical route that would be taken. And it would basically be passing through some really populous areas. And we had a lot of concerns about, many of these populated areas also being low income communities. And the concerns around, environmental justice on that were a big deal to us. But also, when we looked at it, some of us were able to say, hey, this is going to go through for me, it was, my husband's route to work, or very near my home, or some other places where we are. And then of course, all of us living in this area do spend time around some of those interstate interchanges as well. So very concerning stuff.
Yeah, I mean, these existing LNG facilities are a threat to communities in Florida, and we need to keep the pressure on the president to really work against these dangerous facilities and to stop the transportation of LNG, not just in Florida, but everywhere. So sorry, I jumped the gun and brought you back in for a moment.
No, you know what? My bad. I actually, I had the wrong thing in my hand. I'm so sorry about that. Yes. So now am I ready to introduce?
Yeah, go ahead and introduce.
Excellent. So now switching gears again, I'd like to welcome our toxics expert, Fred Millar, and our anti-fossil fuel advocate, organizer, and scientist, and founder of Earth Ethics, Mary Gutierrez. Fred is actually joining us from my home state in Virginia, and Mary is from the Panhandle near where the proposed LNG facility is located. So we're going to start our first question to you, Fred, if that's okay. So that is in general, nationwide, why should we be concerned about this LNG infrastructure build out?
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, it's fair enough to say that LNG up to now has really not been a major part of the U.S. energy picture, but until very recently. But now it's growing very, very fast, and in many cases in a much less regulated way than one would hope. And basically, the oil and gas industry are regarding this as the next big thing. They're going to make a lot of profits. Still pumping fracked gas and oil out of the ground, and they call it a bridge to renewables. They call natural gas and LNG a bridge to renewables, like it's an essential thing that we've got to do. That's very, very debatable. But in fact, there is a huge demand for energy and for natural gas around the world, and LNG is the way that you can ship natural gas around the world. And so our U.S. export facilities are booming, especially along the Gulf Coast. Obama actually was in favor of this, and we really don't know where Biden is going to come down in terms of how strong he's going to stand up to the oil and gas industry. The transport of LNG particularly opens up new risks, but also the operation of sites, because when you bring in natural gas and you basically refrigerate it into LNG, the refrigerants that are used are used in great quantities on your site. And now there's a new recognition that releases of these refrigerants can actually, in a low wind condition, fill up the entire site and then just spontaneously blow up, even if there's no ignition, or get into a nearby community and blow up. So basically, there's just a whole new set of risks that have not been considered until now. The safety regulations that the two agencies are FERC and PHMSA, who regulate the facility site for LNG sites. They're based on exclusion zones, meaning you're not supposed to build a facility that's going to release LNG out into the community. But there's been behind the scenes industry negotiations with those agencies, and industry pressure has changed the way regulations have been done, where in fact the regulations used to, for example, in the Jordan Cove case in Oregon, in terms of the LNG facility proposed there, the proponent actually had to calculate really huge accidents, worst case scenarios from really huge accidents. Now the regulations, what do you know, have been changed so that you can only look at what's called small accidental release sources, meaning you just posit a much smaller release, and then you figure out what the dispersion and explosion potentials would be. And it allows, actually, this whole trend allows for facilities to be placed in more urban areas closer to populations. Now in Florida, you've got the basket case for this, which is the New Fortress Energy Facility in the middle of the Hialeah rail yard. That didn't even have to go through all that kind of regulatory rigmarole that the industry has now achieved, because in fact, it just wasn't, FERC, one of the agencies, just has disclaimed the regulation of small LNG facilities like the one for New Fortress Energy in Miami. That facility, as you know, ships its LNG not by rail tank car, but by intermodal containers, ISO containers they're called, that are 1/3 the size of a railroad tank car, and they can just be placed on a flat car and tied down and sent up the Florida East Coast Railroad to whatever port will ship them out to the Caribbean. That's where New Fortress Energy has a bunch of receiving facility connections. Now, LNG has been exempted for many years by US EPA from needing to be considered under the community right to know laws, which would have provided important safety documents like risk management plans and so forth. But in fact, that's not actually being used, and it's not necessary, it's not required. Congress for many years have been concerned about LNG shipments and LNG facilities, and they have often said, please seek remote siting. But Congress has never been able to actually pass a law that forces remote siting for example, that might have to deal with that facility in Hialeah. There's a push now, as was mentioned, to get LNG out onto the whole U.S. rail lines. And the Trump administration just did this as a big favor to their oil and gas friends. There really is no demand out there for LNG trains out in the rest of the country. Nobody's come up with a business plan that says we need whole train loads full of LNG out in such and such a place. It's just a speculative, wishful thing that the industry wanted to get in while the getting was good at the Trump bank of issuing favors to the oil and gas industry. The key to all this is keeping the public in the dark. Now, what we see from that is in that Trump final rule on allowing LNG on the rail lines, they actually said that LNG releases from a rail car release could travel some distance into a community, but we're not going to tell you what those distances are because they're, quote, too difficult to calculate, unquote. So again, the public is very assiduously being kept in the dark, and that's a key, of course, to preventing any kind of serious action. After 9/11, there's also a bunch of security concerns about telling citizens about any kind of chemical risk. What's called the Critical Energy Infrastructure Information Law basically makes it possible for state and local officials and federal officials to withhold critical risk information from the public. In all kinds of ways. And of course, your local LEPC systems all around the country. There's 4,100 local emergency planning committees around the country. They're like a religious cult. Every morning when they get up, they put their hands on their hearts and they say, "Today I will not alarm the public." And they just won't do their job. They will not give the information to the public that the public needs. So many major accidents have occurred, including one in 2004 in Washington State, one in 1944 in Cleveland, and in 1979 in Cove Point, and then a very major accident that happened in 2014 in Skikda, Algeria. There's a new concern about terrorism and LNG ships and facilities because of ship attacks on chemical cargoes recently, and also the concern about domestic terrorism. And some opponents have actually defeated, as was mentioned, some LNG proposed facilities. So it's important to be optimistic that a good show of community resistance could sometimes chase away proponents of LNG facilities. And there's some good allies available. The Florida permits are for, as I said, for ISO containers. They're somewhat smaller, but they are still extremely very dangerous. So I'll stop with that in case folks have any questions.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Fred. And we're going to actually get back to those specific transport issues here in Florida. But I want to pose a question to Mary. Well, Mary, we've worked with you for many years to ban fracking in the state. And over the last decade, the US has seen just an exponential increase in fracking operations, which has caused a glut of fracked gas. So how does this increase in fracking play into the climate story of why all of this fracked gas infrastructure?
So great question, Brooke. Thank you for the opportunity. So according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration in 2018, just for a little background information, the U.S. became the top producer of oil and natural gas in the world, ahead of Russia and Saudi Arabia, due to hydraulic fracturing, which in 2019 accounted for 71% of all oil and natural gas wells drilled in the U.S. So one of the environmental consequences of fracking is methane gas emissions, which has greater impacts to our atmosphere than carbon dioxide. And we all know both are greenhouse gases that contribute to climate change. Research also indicates that the U.S. and the oil and gas industry emits 13 million metric tons of methane annually for a leak rate of 2.3% of all production. However, the EPA, by contrast, estimates that the fugitive emission rate is only at 1.4%. But regardless, methane's climate change potential is 84 times that of carbon dioxide. And as we know, or it's just as a reminder, there are harmful effects to those living near extraction sites as well. In addition to the workers that work at these sites, fracking release related processes release contaminants such as hydrogen sulfide, diesel particulates, and VOCs, which have been known to lead to respiratory problems, nervous system impacts, birth defects, blood disorder, and cancer. And these extraction sites are typically located in communities of color in areas with a low socioeconomic standing, thus creating or exacerbating climate justice issues or environmental justice issues. And in addition, the increase of oil and natural gas production in the United States is in direct conflict with the Paris Climate Accord agreement, which, as most of us already know, we have signed back into with Paris and the other nations, which we were initially under Trump's administration taken out of the Paris Agreement. So there's, because of the increase in the oil and gas natural industry, or especially the natural gas industry along the Gulf Coast states, as was mentioned earlier, we can expect to see an increase and more detriment with regards to our environment, and an influx and increase in climate change issues and things of that nature, including intensity of storms, frequency of these storms. And we're already experiencing that in the Gulf Coast, the Gulf states, as well as other parts of the United States. So we need to really get a handle on this.
Thanks, Mary. Would it be fair to say that, you know, this increase in fracking in other states and having access to these export routes through Florida and other Gulf states is just encouraging them to keep fracking for more gas? Like, would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I agree completely. Yes, that would be a fair assessment. I mean, there are no hard and fast rules and regulations on how to address this. We don't, I mean, it could very well be that we are traveling in areas down the highway with some of this gas, even some of the wastewater associated with it. So yeah, we need to be paying attention, and we need to make sure that the people that are putting policies in place are actually looking at how this is impacting the climate, how it's affecting public health, how it's impacting other issues, whether it's air, water, land use, and our transportation systems.
Thank you so much, Mary. Really appreciate that. Mm-hmm. So I want to throw it back to you, Fred. You had mentioned the transport of LNG that's happening here in Florida, and you know, kind of opened yourself up that we could talk more about this later. So could we go back to that? Like, so specifically here in Florida, what's going on with transport?
Well, you may know that the real expert on the quantitative side of all this in terms of numbers of shipments and so forth is Cece Schofield, who lives in Stuart, Florida, right along the Florida East Coast Railroad tracks. And she's been a dogged researcher on all those issues and activist as well. But the current situation is that the New Fortress Energy company, the scheme that was set up by Wes Edens, the entrepreneur par excellence. Actually, he's been able to raise a lot of money from investors. Has constructed this site in the Hialeah rail yard that then sends its LNG. Well, that site is located in Miami for only one reason, and that is it is at the end of a pipeline and it's in the middle of a rail yard, which means that that's what they intended to do was put a small liquefaction facility there, bring in the natural gas by pipeline from wherever, you know, maybe it's no doubt all fracked gas, and then liquefy it, and then send it to ports up the Florida East Coast for export to the Caribbean facilities that want gas. The Department of Energy regulates the export side of things, but they don't look at the safety side. They just give out exports left and right like it was candy. The Suwannee Riverkeeper, John Quarterman, knows a lot about that whole side of things, about the patterns of transportation into Florida across the area that he watches over. And then the facility, this is a facility that no federal agency has approved the siting of. The only thing they have is a wink and a nod from PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which did a very brief inspection at the site and then said, well, we think it would meet federal standards. But PHMSA on the phone emphasizes, we do not have siting authority, and nobody has actually approved the siting of this facility, which is, I think, pretty much unique in the country. The Florida East Coast Railroad actually commissioned a quantitative risk assessment, excuse me, however, from a consultant named Exponent. The Federal Railroad Administration has that quantitative risk assessment, but they only release it to people who ask for it, like under Freedom of Information Act, with every single data point redacted. Every single data point redacted. It does have some good information in it that we ought to get our hands on. However, but so far we've been unable to do that. Excuse me. So I think that, one thing that would be important to note about the potential consequences of a rail release is that the industry will tell you on every occasion, if they can, that it's not mainly an explosion you have to worry about, but the fact is an LNG rail tank car, if being heated from the outside from some other factor, can have what's called a boiling liquid evaporating vapor explosion, a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion, I should say. So it's a kind of a, as was mentioned by Mary, it's a kind of an experiment with the Florida citizens along that route. So I think I'll stop with that.
Wow, that is that's pretty crazy. Thank you so much for that explanation. Mary, if I can bring you back in here, Noptro, a Panhandle fossil fuel company, has filed for a permit to build a fracked gas export facility in Port St. Joe. Can you speak to the threats that fracked gas is already posing in the Panhandle communities and the impacts that this facility will have on those communities?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Sarah, for that. So again, well, I'll just share a little additional information, but so the U.S. Energy Information Administration, as of 2021, states that Florida has 35 gas producing wells with most of the natural gas production coming from the J fields located in Santa Rosa County, which is in the Florida Panhandle. Most of the wells have been producing for years and have support from the local government due to the revenues that their wells generate. And in 2019, an addition of 9 permits were issued for exploration in the J fields. Now, some of the issues with the wells that have been producing for years is that they are not producing like they used to. And the oil and gas industry are looking for ways to expand in which they can tap into their reserves, including the potential implementation of hydraulic fracturing. And although Florida Department of Environmental Protection now includes language in operating permits that addresses hydraulic fracturing, this is really just a self-regulating condition. So the potential for hydraulic fracturing in the Panhandle poses numerous environmental impacts to our air, water, land use, and transportation system, as we've talked about previously, as well as to overall public health. And another issue is the disposal of the wastewater generated from the fracking processes in order to obtain the natural gas. And for us, for us here in the Panhandle, we already suffer from a lot of deep well injection, which is one of the ways that the industry wants to wants to dispose of their wastewater once they've completed using that water, because it can't be reused for anything else, obviously. So in the two county area, there's numerous chemical plants that already use deep well injection. So to add additional deep well injection from the fracking and extraction of natural gas would just cause further issues. So one of the, again, not just air, water, and land use and transportation issues, but one of the issues that we have had occur in the Panhandle was in 2019, early 2019, Northwest Florida near Jay and lower Alabama near Flomaton, because we're right in the Panhandle, we're pretty close, we border Alabama. And we experienced a series of unexplained earthquakes over several months. And the first thought was that the earthquakes were related to the wells at the J fields, the existing deep well injection sites that I mentioned, and hydraulic fracturing. So I, as an advocate and environmental scientist, I reached out to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, say, you know, what's going on? And they stated that there was no fracking being conducted at any of the sites. But there was no actual site inspection that had been done to confirm this. So, so I just want to say, you know, for us in Northwest Florida, you would never really think that, you know, we would be, you know, subjected to earthquakes, but it's not really that far-fetched an idea if we realize that fracking really intentionally causes earthquakes, usually with the magnitude smaller than 1. And this allows them to enhance permeability, and by lubricating the rocks and making them more likely to slip, you know. And fracking, as we probably all here know, that has been linked to larger earthquakes. The largest earthquake known to be induced by hydraulic fracturing in the United States was an M4 earthquake in Texas and one in Ohio in 2014, which was a magnitude of 3. And causing the state officials to close that well 2 days later. So the threats of frack gas and to obtain LNG is like I mentioned before, are impacts to our water, air, transportation, and earthquakes. So, you know, if you live here in the Panhandle, and even if you don't, we'd like to encourage you to get engaged and involved with what's happening with natural gas exploration and production. We're not in the position to rely on the government entities that should be regulating for us. So I hope I addressed the question sufficiently. Please let me know if you need me to follow up on anything, but I'm gonna leave it at that because I get very passionate about this subject matter, because I've been following all the permits in the Panhandle for numerous years. And I will share this with you before I give it back to Brooke or Sarah, but I was dismayed that when we started having these earthquakes, I had reached out to the DEP also, not just to ask about the earthquakes, but I had reached out to them to cease or to stop giving out any additional permits until we found out what were those earthquakes coming, what was happening, why were they happening. But that's when they went ahead and issued 9 additional permits without even, following up to see what was causing the earthquakes from happening. Anyway, so obviously I was very dismayed at that lack of action of an organization that is supposed to be protecting the environment and public health, which is actually in their Florida statutes. Anyway, I will leave it at that. So
thank you so much, Mary. I think you're in good company with feeling very passionate about what is happening or what's not happening, as you just pointed out, like this complete lack of oversight on these dangerous processes is just unconscionable. At this time, though, I do want to open it up to the audience to see if you have some questions. So once again, if you have a question, go ahead and click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I see a few of you have already. And we'll go ahead and answer the questions that are in there. Fred, Sarah, Mary, any of these questions can go to any of us. So if you feel like one of these questions is something that you want to answer when I read it out, go ahead and volunteer. So the first question was from Ed, and Ed did have to jump off, but he was talking about the refrigerants that were being used, about them being very harmful greenhouse gases. And I think, couldn't we pose that question into something larger of, through this entire process, what are the greenhouse gases at play that we have to be concerned about?
Fred, I don't know if you want to take that one, if it goes into specifics about what the gases are.
You know, I really don't know a lot about that. So I'm focusing mainly on the public safety aspects and not on the climate change types of issues.
I will say that the refrigerants themselves are very harmful greenhouse gases. And as you guys recall, years ago, probably even decades now, we had issues with the ozone layer and the depletion of the ozone layer due to chlorofluorocarbons, and we addressed that, right? So, and we actually saw the ozone layer mending, if you will. But recently, there has been some evidence that we are starting to see that hole again to come back. So, and it could very well be, I mean, I don't know, it could be very well be what we're having to deal with now, the refrigerants that we're allowing to be used for the LNG processes could be affecting that. And so we might be having to readdress an old issue that we had all thought we had put to rest. So, and I'll let somebody else, step up.
Thanks, Mary. I don't know, I'm not an expert in this, but I do know a little bit about the HFCs. So what happened when we had the ozone depleting gases, we then replaced them because we were concerned about the ozone hole with kind of these different gases. But the trouble with them is that they are, most of them are up to thousands of times more potent global warming gases than what we were using before. So that there's a huge problem with global warming with the greenhouse gases with them. So the Kigali Agreement that was put into place a few years ago has been adopted and as part of the omnibus bill last year, that was addressed, and so we're now in starting a process of transitioning, kind of decommissioning the older gases, and there are some kind of healthier green gases. I mean, I think it's got a commonality with fracked gas in that there are of course corporate interests at play here, and that is the reason why we learned years and years ago that these refrigerants we were using were harmful, very harmful for the environment. But there was a lot of lobbying by the interests, the manufacturers and producers of it. So some common themes, and it's one to be concerned about, but it will be kind of working its way out, as I understand.
Yeah, and just to even add onto that a little bit further, beyond just the refrigerants and the threats that they pose. As Mary talked about earlier, methane gas is one of the worst greenhouse gases for accelerating climate change. And that's what we have to realize what this fracked gas is that what it's letting out is methane gas. So, they're through the entire process from the moment it's taken out of the ground until it's transported on trains, often fueled by LNG, to the port to the area where it's then processed and then exported. We are seeing greenhouse gases being emitted continually. It's a great question. Thanks, Ed. Okay. I know the person who asked this next question, Marilyn, is one of our Food and Water Team Tampa members. And so I'm going to add a little bit of personal background, I know, to why she's asking this question. Along with Sarah, Marilyn was one of our activists who went to the Port Authority's board meeting, where we were able to uncover that they were not in an agreement with Strom. And Marilyn had said to me just how struck she was by how little the people on the Port Authority even knew about LNG, yet they were part of this proposed facility. And that's something that as we've been doing research, we also have just been confused by the complete lack of information out there as far as, what exactly does it take to get approval to build an LNG facility in Florida, or anywhere, I guess. But maybe you could go to that, Fred. Like, what does an LNG facility need in order to be approved?
Well, there are several federal agencies that basically share jurisdiction about LNG. One is FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which has sole responsibility for siting approval. The other one is PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which basically creates the safety standards that FERC then uses when they approve a facility or not. This is a very, this is a little bit like learning about how the Congress operates. I mean, it's pretty dismaying, when you actually look at it pretty closely. And in this case, the agencies actually sit down with the proponent, with the company, a year in advance of when they hope to submit an actual application. The agencies sit down with them a year in advance and have all kinds of staff discussions, which amount to negotiating, where the agency is trying to say, here are our regulations, let us help you figure out how you can meet the regulations. And the company says, we'd like to do X and Y and Z. And so what can we do to fit within the regulations that you have, et cetera. Now, the regulations themselves are not that strict. As I say, they've been relaxed in some ways. But the main thing to note is that there's just this strong investment by the federal government in helping the agencies go and do this. The Coast Guard has some regulatory authority also if there's a port or a waterway involved in the situation, and often there is. So they have some regulatory authority. The federal regulations really preempt most of what states and localities can do. People who have defeated major fossil fuel proposals in recent years, you might know, have been able to rely on state and local authority and raising local opposition to veto a proposal, but only if there's some local law on zoning or whatever that or permits that on water use or whatever that the locality can withhold from the facility. In terms of federal regulations, the federal agencies handle all that, and like I say, they have been basically promoting LNG as an important new aspect of how we're going to get rid of our fracked gas. How are we going to ever make a profit on that? How are we going to keep pumping it out of the ground? Well, turn it into LNG and ship it around the world to the rising economies and rising demands in Asia, especially, but also in Europe. I mean, even Germany said, okay, we'll build a couple of LNG import facilities here, but you're going to have to compete on price with our natural gas that we get from Russia by pipeline. But I mean, it's a gigantic world market now, and it just depends on trying to force what President Trump tried to do was force LNG into our allies in Europe and in Asia, and just use American muscle, which is in a sense, luckily, less and less.
Yeah, I think you point something out really important there, Fred, which is the exports of these gases is just incentivizing them to continue to pump for more oil and gas, to continue fracking. It's something that I ran across in our work around moving the city of Tampa to a commitment to clean energy, is that a commitment to clean energy doesn't mean much unless you also are stopping the continued extraction and transport and export of fossil fuels. That's why even though we have more communities than ever committing to renewable energy, we are seeing increases in global greenhouse gases. And it's because even if we're not doing it in our backyard, anytime that we're sending those dirty fuels overseas to other communities, the greenhouse gas impacts affect us all. This is a global problem, and that's why we need to stop it at its source and not look just to those corporations who are putting profits over people when we do have the ability to move away from those. I do see we have one more question, but I believe that Mary had covered and when Marilyn sent that question out. So I do want us to get to our call to action, which is what we can do about all of this that's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Okay, so like I did at the very beginning, I promised you that you would have an opportunity to act. And that's what we can do here. So the Biden administration has the ability to take immediate action now to stop the transport of liquefied natural gas by rail. They can undo the Trump administration rule. So this link, if you follow it, you can send a message directly to President Biden and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg to ban the transport of LNG by rail. So if we can go ahead and put that in the chat, and you can click on it. So when you click on that link, it will take you to a page where you can send an email to both of them, and you can have the ability to customize your message as well. And once you've sent that out, please share this link with your family and friends. We need as many people as possible sending a message on the dangers of rail transport. So I'll give a moment so everyone can jot down that link. Okay, and how else can people help, Sarah?
Sorry, I'm muting. We wanted to very much invite everyone to join us in this fight by supporting the work we're doing to stop dangerous fossil fuels. Florida really is ground zero for this fight, and we can put an end to fracking by stopping transport and export. We're at a really crucial time in history to stop fossil fuels, and ending the new fracked gas infrastructure and exports is a big part of that fight. Food and Water doesn't take any money from corporations or businesses, and the work that we do is because of generous supporters like you and me, who make monthly gifts to support our work. You can join the Food and Water Watch family and fight like you live here by following this link that we'll put in the chat to you too.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, Sarah's not only a person fighting out in the fields, but she has also made a commitment to help support the work that we continue to do. You know, these fossil fuel companies, they have huge pocketbooks filled with cash to continually fight these. And the work that we do, we're not selling dangerous, dirty fossil fuels, but we are just working to mobilize. And so anyone who joins us can really help make a really big difference. Finally, you can stay in touch with the work we are doing, find out about other things like this, find about actions we do in the field, things you can do from home, like placing a phone call, sending an email, by opting into our Florida texts. So you simply need to pick up your phone, and where you would type a phone number, enter 23321. I know it's not 10 digits, but it works, trust me. So put 23321 in the 2 area on your phone. And then in the message, write Florida. And this will let you get occasional texts. It's typically only about once a month, if that, unless something really big is going on, then we'll let you know more. But to find out about the work we're doing and how you can tap into it. Okay, and then that is where we've come to the end of this webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you to our fantastic panel, Mary, Frank, Sarah, really, I don't know why I said Frank, that was my grandfather's name. I was looking at a picture of him. Mary, Fred, and Sarah, thank you so very much. And we just really appreciate you coming and sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us. Everyone who registered will receive an email with a recording of this evening's webinar, so please feel free to share that. My contact information and Mary's contact information are also on the screen if you want to reach out to us about anything.
And I just want to say before we hop off, if you are in the Tampa region, please join us for our next Food and Water Team Tampa meeting on Monday, October 18th at 6 p.m.
Okay, well, everyone, thank you for joining us. This was on Facebook Live. You will receive the recording. So everyone have a beautiful night, and let's fight this fight together. Bye-bye.